Wait, how does this work?
You just press the button.
This one?
No, not that one.
You're listening to Press the Button, a Plowshares Fund podcast dedicated to nuclear policy and national security.
Everything seems impossible until it happens.
Everyone would be affected by a nuclear war.
Our government is planning to spend trillions of dollars to develop new nuclear weapons that we don't need.
You can't win a nuclear war.
We are all experts on nuclear weapons because we are all going to be affected by those nuclear weapons.
And here are your hosts, Joe Cirincione and Michelle Dover.
Welcome back to this 42nd episode of Press the Button. I'm your host today since Joe is taking a well-deserved break. In early warning, we'll be discussing the anti-war response to the crisis between U.S. and Iran, as well as looking at the latest news out of North Korea. There won't be a question and answer this week, given Joe's travels, but as always, please send us your questions through Twitter. We're at PressButtonPod. DM us a question and we will get it on the air. In terms of the interview, though, you're still going to hear from Joe. Last week, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and the Elders were in Washington, D.C. to set the doomsday clock. And you probably heard that the clock was set to the closest it's ever been to midnight, just 100 seconds away. Joe sits down with two people who were involved in this effort. Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, and Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. They lead the Elders, a group of global leaders who work together for peace, justice, and human rights. And this is an interview you're not going to want to miss. So take a listen, and if you like what you hear, give us a rating, a review, or a share. Your feedback is what makes this show better. But we have a lot to get through today, and the clock is ticking.
And now, early warning, early warning, early warning, early warning. A 7-minute synopsis of this week's nuclear news.
Thank you, Del. Today I'm joined by Mana Mostatabi, Communications Director at the National Iranian American Council, and John Carl Baker, Senior Program Officer here at Plowshares Fund. Mana, John Carl, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to be here.
So, you know how this works. We have 7 minutes to cover all of the nuclear news, and that time starts now. Mana, we've talked a lot on Early Warning about what this crisis has meant for the nuclear agreement, what we have seen in the United States, what the actions that have been taken in the Senate and the House. What are you seeing in Iran?
You are seeing a country that is majority under 40, sort of adopting a disenfranchisement with the United States that I don't think we've ever seen in this generation before. This is a generation that grew up on Friends and How I Met Your Mother and, cousins who insist on going by Barney because they just love American culture so much. They love the people so much. And we're really at risk right now of using U.S. policies to alienate an entire generation that might be lost to diplomacy because they've seen, look, the United States is not going to abide by its promises. So why are we going to give them another shot?
And what does this mean for the other factions within Iran?
Right. So the parliamentary elections are coming up in February, and the reformists are essentially going to be pushed out. I mean, that's it. You're going to see that this is a competition between the conservatives and the hardliners who are intent on sort of centralizing power, consolidating it all, and essentially using this as a platform to sort of sever all engagement with the United States. This is a see, we told you sort of moment. And the more the hardliners have power, the more the conservatives are in power, the bigger the crackdown you're going to see on the Iranian people. You saw this crackdown sort of already in November with the gas price hikes. There were several hundred people that were killed. And so if this Trump administration is really intent on supporting the Iranian people and their human rights, they wouldn't be imposing policies that consolidate the hardliners. They wouldn't be sanctioning them to death. And that's the reality of where the Iranian people are right now.
And so shifting gears and looking back here in the United States, what has the response been in trying to push back against a war?
You've seen I mean, sort of this pro-peace, pro-diplomacy catalyzation that I'm not sure I ever saw in my youth. This is a generation of millennials that grew up under the Iraq War. We were framed by 9/11 and all the shocks that reverberated in the United States and now across the Middle East. And so the appetite for war is not there. We're struggling with major issues that impact us, student loans, climate change. And to think that any of our money is going to go spent on a war that there is no popular support is astounding.
John Carl, you've studied anti-war movements across now several decades. What is different?
I'm not that old, Michelle.
I'm not saying you were around for that, but you've studied them. What is different now?
Well, I think there is a difference. I think that while we saw a very rapid response, mobilization in response to the threat of war after the Soleimani strike, what's happening now in the anti-war movement isn't purely oppositional. That's a part of it. But with institutions like the Quincy Institute, with organizations like Win Without War, Move On, and others, I think there's more interest in actually formulating a positive vision for U.S. foreign policy that emphasizes diplomacy and really sees war as a last resort. That's something that we didn't see much of in the 2002, 2003 protests in the lead up to the Iraq War. So it's a pretty new development, and I think it's something that's very encouraging.
Mana, what should we expect to see in the coming weeks?
Well, I think let's see how the House vote this week works out. There are kind of a package of measures in the House this week on Thursday, actually, that would kind of limit what Trump can do in terms of funding a war with Iran and also the repeal of the AUMF, the 2002 AUMF, which has been used to, in its vagaries, been used to justify some attacks previously. So let's wait and see and hope that our elected officials can come on record and support public opinion that there is no appetite for war.
And I just want to add, the National Iranian American Council really has been at the heart of these efforts. Where can people go to learn more about how they can get involved?
You should go to NIACaction.org. That's our grassroots advocacy arm. And there's plenty of actions we can take. You can write to your members of Congress. But I think at this point, we really need to lodge our complaints. And we really are in a position, I think you had noted, that we should be looking forward. We already know what the horrors of war looks like, and we don't need to repeat that again. So,
switching gears, Jean Carl, last week, North Korea announced that it would no longer abide by these two moratoria on testing nuclear weapons or long-range missiles. We have not really been talking about the so-called Christmas present. Is this it?
Well, it could be. I would stress that this is Ju Young-chol, who's the counselor at North Korea's UN mission at Geneva, reiterating something that Kim Jong-un has already said, which is that these moratoria are self-imposed and we are no longer necessarily going to abide by them. It's probably not surprising. The North Koreans have not had great success in their engagement with the Trump administration. The Trump administration has held a very hard line, despite Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un. It hasn't been willing to offer sanctions relief. And the North Koreans are signaling their dissatisfaction. So we need to be aware of this and be monitoring it in the coming months, because there could be an interesting development.
And with that, our time is up. Thank you so much for joining me.
This is Joe Sorrentioni. I'm delighted to be here with Mary Robinson and Ban Ki-moon. Mary Robinson was the first female president of Ireland and is a former United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Ban Ki-moon is the former United Nations Secretary General and former South Korean Foreign Minister. Now, they are both with the Elders, a group of independent global leaders working together for peace and human rights. Mary Robinson is chair of the Elders, and Ban Ki-moon is the deputy chair. Thank you so much for coming here today. It's a pleasure.
It's a great pleasure for me.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. You have had a very busy day here in Washington. You joined with the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in setting the doomsday clock to 100 seconds to midnight. This is the closest the clock has been to midnight since its creation in 1947. If I could ask you, Madam President, why? Why do you think the danger is that acute?
Well, actually, I thought it was very well explained this morning by the 4 scientists who spoke. They spoke in clear, communicating language that everybody could understand.
Yes.
And they addressed the issue of nuclear, the issue of climate, and the issue of disruptive technologies. And it was very solemn and very stark, I thought, because all 3 have deteriorated. Some of the nuclear agreements have unraveled, and more countries have or are trying to get nuclear weapons. On the climate side, we're just not changing course in a way the scientists had told us we must, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And we've lost, science itself is being undermined. And then we have the disruptive technologies, the cyber warfare potentially, or artificial intelligence controlling weapons, all of that problem. And
Yes.
so I just thought, it's annoying sometimes when scientists enter a lot of caveats and talk scientific gobbledygook. You don't know what they mean. But this morning was clear as anything.
It was.
And it needed to be, because after all, we were moving 20 seconds closer to midnight.
Yes, it was a very somber event. And Mr. Secretary General, if I could ask you, at the event today, you said, quote, "At a time when world leaders should be focused on nuclear escalation and the climate emergency, we are instead witnessing denial, disregard, and dangerous brinksmanship." Could you deepen that a little bit? What do you mean? What do you see? Who is in denial?
First of all, 2 biggest nuclear powers, United States and Russia, I think their relationship is not a good one at this time. They are not talking each other about how to deal with this lack of nuclear disarmament architecture. With the termination of INF, intermediary range nuclear forces last year, and this New START treaty will be terminated if it is just let go until February next year. Then in such a case, virtually in this world, there is no such architecture to control. And there is not a good prospect for coming NPT review conference.
Yes.
I'm afraid that it may end without any agreement, like it had happened 5 years ago. Then for 10 years, there will be no such agreement. Then their relationship had been shrouded in mistrust, denial, and counter-argument. I'm really concerned about all this kind of a situation where nuclear wars and conflict can happen any time by accident or by design. So we have to prevent such kind of situations by all means. Yeah.
Thank you. And Madam President, last year at the Munich Security Conference, and again in your speech at the Nuclear Disarmament Conference in The Hague this year, you presented the Elders Plan for this, what you called your minimization agenda based on the 4 Ds. I thought this was elegant, beautiful, and quite sensical. Could you walk us through your 4 Ds?
Yes, thank you. I think what we were trying to do as elders was bridge between the nuclear ban treaty, which was adopted by a very significant number of countries, or is being maybe ratified this year with any luck.
Yes.
But no nuclear powers. So there's that gap which is not helping. And so we wanted to address the nuclear powers with our minimization agenda and encapsulated in 4 Ds. And the first D is doctrine, that every nuclear-armed state should make an unequivocal no first use declaration. The second D is de-alerting. The highest priority must be given to taking as many weapons as possible off their current high alert status. The third is deployment. There are far too many in the stockpile of nuclear weapons currently operationally deployed. And fourthly, decreased numbers. The number of nuclear warheads in existence should be reduced significantly. And we know that this is not the full answer, but if we could do that, we would have a lot safer world. At the moment, we're going the other way. We're in a sort of new nuclear arms race. We're talking about, hypersonic missiles. We're talking about a space force. We're talking about satellites, being attacked possibly, and it's very scary.
Yeah, and your reduction number is in keeping with other experts, but it's quite low compared to the current standard. So as you point out, there currently are about 14,000 nuclear weapons in the world.
And what do we want those for? I mean, it's it's unbelievable.
And that the countries should be working to reduce, particularly the U.S. and Russia, which have about 4,000 in their active arsenal, to go down to 500 each in their active arsenal.
And that would be more than, I mean, even that is a huge number, but at least we could say that's real progress.
Yeah. Great. But as you point out, Mr. Secretary General, we're not making any progress towards reductions at all. In fact, the one treaty that we have, the New START agreement, is in danger of lapsing. This is something I think the elders have focused on particularly, a realizable step. Do you see any hope of getting the U.S. and Russia to move on this?
There is a way to prevent from this happening. The elders believe that President Trump could fully use the statement made by President Putin of Russia that he is ready to agree without any precondition the extension of New START by another 5 years. I understand that President Trump is promoting and arguing that China should also be included in there. Now we have only 1 year to go. It will be almost impossible to have trilateral negotiations agreed upon by February next year. My feeling is that it will be extremely important and strategically wise to first of all extend this treaty by another 5 years or whichever it may be. Then I think if necessary, China can join. But in a matter of reality, China cannot be compared with Russia and the United States in terms of number of nuclear weapons. It is known that they have around 300 nuclear weapons. So it may not be a good idea to include China there. But that's not important for me. What is important at this time, we must have a certain architecture for nuclear disarmament in place before it is too late. That is one thing. And as I said again, the prospect of NPT review conference is not good at all. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, Madam President, because also in your remarks at various conferences, you called out the fundamental inequality and hypocrisy at the heart of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. What do you mean?
Well, the reality is we're in a stage of a total kind of almost denial that we have the kind of problem we have. We're not seeing the leadership we need for the reasons that Ban Ki-moon was outlining. And so where are we? The clock has moved nearer than ever, nearer than the height of the Cold War. I remember as a young woman marching to ban the bomb, marching against the nuclear situation then. Why now are we not seeing the same movement of young people? I mean, there are some, and of course the nuclear ban treaty has been a significant step, but it's necessary now that we alert people to the fact that our leaders are not going in the right direction, they're actually going in the wrong direction, and that there is a lot of hypocrisy around this, and basically a lack of a real leadership that would address the minimization agenda that the elders are putting forward, where we would actually be reducing significantly.
Let me pick up on one thing you said. You call yourself the elders, but I notice on your website, which by the way is beautiful. You have a gorgeous website. You've been featuring some columns and some remarks by some of the young people out there working on this.
Very much
Cecily
so.
Thompson-Williams
Yes.
from a group called Beyond the Bomb, and
Yes.
also a person I think you spoke with maybe at the Hague conference from the International Physicians.
right.
And so you say there aren't enough. Are you encouraged by some of the signs that you see?
I'm encouraged by those that are taking part, and being at the Hague was significant from my point of view to talk to some wonderful people, including
Yeah.
young women who are taking this issue on. But it's nothing like the climate issue in the sense of having an awareness among millions of young people, even school children. They should be actually as concerned about this issue as they are about the climate issue.
Yes.
It's equally a threat. And we need to understand, as the elders keep saying, we have two existential threats to our very existence. And we have a very fragile multilateral system that has become weaker because of a lack of leadership and because of dismantling of some existing agreements, and the pulling out in particular by the United States from the Paris Agreement, from the Iran nuclear agreement, from the Human Rights Council, etc.
Yeah, we're pulling out of the very agreements and not creating anything to take their place, right? Tearing down the old, but not building the new. So what role do you think the elders could play, Mr. Secretary General? What are the kinds of things you do to bring attention to these issues and promote solutions to them?
Of course, the elders do not have any administrative or political power at this time. But we have.
Yeah, how does that feel?
I think we can feel freer in terms of speaking out. When you are in the office, then whether president, the prime minister, or secretary general, sometimes need to consider how you can bring the agenda forward. In such a case, you will have to listen to the voices of all other partners, that you cannot just go ahead. That is reality. You cannot just force your idea to other people to accept it.
Yes.
Then in such a case, it's not a negotiation, it's not a mutual understanding. Then as elders, we are free to speak out of our voices of out of conscience as well as morality. So we have more moral power or moral influence based on our wisdom and our experiences, which can be useful to the world leaders now.
And you've taken on this nuclear challenge as a key part of one of the issues.
I have to just say, we've been talking about the elders, and you introduced me as chair, and that Ban Ki-moon is a deputy chair. For me, it's interesting because, after all, he was my boss for 3 mandates in the UN system, for the Great Lakes, and then for climate change, and then for El Nino and climate. And the great thing about this man is that he is a very supportive man who appointed many women to high positions in the UN system, and now supports his chair, who happens to also be a woman. And I think that's very good. It's very remarkable that that this works very well.
Can I just ask you about that issue, about the gender in national security? I'm going up to Princeton in a few weeks to take part in a program where we're going to talk about the need for greater gender and racial diversity in the national security space. What are you trends? Getting better, getting worse? How does it look to you?
I'm not so familiar, I think, with gender in the security space. I was very struck, as I said, at The Hague by seeing the young women who were speaking, and the head of the ICANN, Beatrice, is a good example of that, phenomenal. I spent a lot of time and continue to speak about gender in the climate context because it was a very technical, scientific, male and insensitive world. When I went to Copenhagen, I couldn't believe it. It was my first conference on climate. And I discovered, we needed to make it about people, about gender, about human rights, and get that into the Paris Climate Agreement under the leadership of Ban Ki-moon. That was very important. It would be equally important in the security that, as you say, there is diversity and that there is a gender responsiveness to the issues. Certainly, women have been very involved in the marches that I was talking about that I grew up with, in the 70s and early 80s. And women took over nuclear installations in the UK and elsewhere.
Yes, I know some of those women.
I'm sure you do. So
maybe Rebecca Johnson, for
yes,
example.
Indeed. Yes, yes. They were disruptive. I was saying this morning that I feel both in relation to the nuclear issue and in relation to the climate issue, we have to disrupt because we cannot continue with business as usual, the status quo. It's not going to get us where we need to be. So we need to find ways. Sometimes those ways can also be, quite witty. They don't always have to be brute force or, cutting down barbed wire or whatever. But I think there are ways of, for example, I'm more familiar again on the climate. I think it's possible to disrupt as a shareholder at a meeting and ask about the risks you incur when you're too invested in fossil fuel, whether it's coal, oil, or gas. Everybody has a bank account. On the podcast that I have, Mothers of Invention, my fellow podcaster, who's a comedian, rang up her bank and rang her, you could listen as she was ringing up, and said she wanted to divest because her bank, Chase Bank, was too invested in fossil fuel. And the woman she was speaking to didn't know what she was talking about. And she said, you better get on to headquarters. And so Maeve, my colleague, said, I'll do that. And then she said, well, where are you? I'm now in New York speaking to you. Where are you? Oh, I'm in the Philippines, says the woman. And Maeve says, oh, the Philippines. You have terrible climate problems there. And of course, this made the case because the woman talked about the climate problems. I think wit and humour can also be very helpful in this very stark, difficult world.
Wonderful. Mothers of Invention. Huh?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'll start listening. I'll subscribe and rate your program.
Let me add to what Mary Robinson just said. More and more women have been participating and showing their leadership in the security area. There has been some perception that women cannot handle all this security. But during my time, at least for 10 years, I have appointed many women who were appointed as commanding general of United Nations peacekeeping operations. And the police chief of the United Nations Police was also, for the first time, a woman. And I have appointed also many negotiators, women negotiators for peace and conflict resolution. So it's a matter of how you explore and develop their capacity. But all this talent and capacity have not been utilized. Then most unused resources was women's capacity, particularly in the security area. Now you see more and more political leaders are women in many countries. So number of political leadership of women and security-related women leadership have been increasing now.
Yes. You can't win a fight with one hand tied behind your back, right? We need both. I'd be remiss if I let you go, Mr. Secretary General, without asking you about Korea, about the possibility that we might yet reach some agreement with North Korea in the remaining months of the Trump administration. What's your assessment?
It's quite disappointing that all these high expectations, which was created 2 years ago on the occasion of Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games 2018, now seems to have been faded away. I think basically the North Korea has not made the clearly stated there what is the real meaning and position of denuclearization of their policies. So there has been some misunderstandings of what they were really up to. President Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un, North Korean leader, has really been leading this process much faster than expected. But in the end, I think we have not been able to fully understand and verify whether North Korea was really up to their commitment. Now, just 2 days ago, North Korean diplomat in disarmament committee in Geneva declared that North Korea will never be now. It's not going to be bound by their previous commitment publicly announced.
Yes.
But I think it seems that we have hit almost the bottom, but there is a tendency that when you hit the bottom, it's bound to go up.
We call that the dead cat bounce.
Yes.
That even a dead cat bounces.
During since early 1990s, when this nuclear negotiation had begun, I think we have experienced such kind of ups and downs.
Yes.
So I'm more hopeful that this process may also lead to better negotiations. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, that's a hopeful note to end on. You were on a 2-day blitz of Washington, the National Press Club, the Bulletin, over to my alma mater, University Georgetown. Yeah, I know you have meetings with administration officials. Are you going up to Capitol Hill at all?
No, we're going to Brookings tomorrow for a meeting. We're actually going to the State Department, yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and I hope everyone will check out the website of the Elders and of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists for more information. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil, Zach Brown, Derek Zender, Alex Spire, and Will Lowry. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Research by Alex Spire. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and the Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit plowshares.org.